Day 1268 of the war. Donald Trump insists that he will be tough with Putin, assuring European partners that he is not going to surrender Ukraine to the Kremlin. Zelensky's European leaders brought their position to Trump before meeting with Putin, negotiations excelling from the current LBS, but first, a ceasefire and no legal recognition of Russian territories, and no right to vote for Putin in the European and North Atlantic future of Ukraine. Trump respected the conversation with his comrades positively, but as much as he rejects their demands, he'll show them tomorrow himself. Ukrainian strikes deep into Russia continue. At night, Gorilam Pazalukla burned in Volgograd, confirmed local residents and the head of the region. Also, Ukrainian drones for the second time this month hit the oil transfer station in Nacke on a strategic oil supply, Druzhba. Meanwhile, sanctions against Russia's defense industry also continue to work. A broken state defense order for the production of Kh-59 missiles, reported in Guri. In Pokrovsk, so far everything is going to the localization of the so-called breakthrough, that is, infiltration behind Russian defense. Russian participants of the operation are being eliminated and captured, and actively. Some Ukrainian analysts write that this breakthrough is over for the Russians like a boiler, but for now, the information is small. Meanwhile, the Russians continue to flaunt Ukrainian defense with COTS, hinting that this was not the last attempt to break through the front in this sector. Z-volunteers are once again complaining that they've run out of funds for fundraising, while the Russian state is spending enormous funds on payouts to the dead, not on maintaining soldiers' lives. Meanwhile, the Russian military themselves can't get those exact payments, writing 5 calls to Putin, the investigative committee in sports lotto, sometimes in rapid execution, which, unfortunately, we'll listen to today. All this and more in today's latest report, which you can support with a like, a comment, and by subscribing to the channel. All these actions promote the video, especially since your subscriptions are important for YouTube's algorithms. You can also support the channel financially on Patreon. Links in the description or by buying NVPN. This is a tool to bypass blockages that allow you to bypass blockages. Watch YouTube at normal speed. Use Twitter, Instagram, now call in Telegram and WhatsApp because Russia has forbidden video calls, even WhatsApp and Telegram calls. You can do this with the help of VPNs. NVPN will allow you to implement all this and use the normal internet. You can buy by link in the description. The purchase of VPNs and their use in Russia is still legal if something changes, of course. We will let you know after the talk with Trump. The joint press conference was a speech by Friedrich Merz and Vladimir Zelensky. Here is the railway support for Ukraine without any nuances, bitely notes. Not that there is something new in it, we will just record it again. Europe is not making any concessions before Trump in the matters of Ukraine. But what was heard for the first time, Zelensky said that Trump not only supported the guarantee of security of Ukraine, but also was ready to take part in it. And later, this was confirmed by Macron. During the call, the phrase was heard that the US and all its allies are ready to take part in the guarantees of security, but not in the NATO format so that they do not trill the Russian Federation. If we see confirmation from Trump himself in the future, then this is a shift in the position, since before that, the position was that Europe should provide the guarantees itself, without the participation of the US, bitely notes, and then provides full quotes. Here's what Merz said: European and Ukrainian security must be guaranteed. That's the message we, the Europeans, have given President Trump. We have shown how much we in Europe are devoted to this. If we take Germany alone, we've allocated $40 billion in military aid since 2022. We've taken 18 package of sanctions. The American president knows if the US can achieve peace that fulfills the interests of Ukraine and Europe, he can count on our full support. Ukraine should be at the table at any of the following meetings. An important element for starting negotiations should be a ceasefire. Ukraine is ready to discuss territorial matters, but the starting point must be the current line of contact. Legalization of occupied Russian territories is not part of the discussion. Borders cannot be changed by force. Ukraine should be provided with reliable security guarantees. Armed forces of Ukraine should be able to protect the country's sovereignty, and they should have the opportunity to expect European aid in the future. The negotiations should be part of the North Atlantic strategy. With support from Ukraine and with pressure on Russia, if there is no movement from Russia, the US and Europe should increase their pressure. President Trump knows our position and is share it to a greater degree, Merz said. Zelensky, you said there must be a three-way format of talks, there must be a ceasefire, there must be reliable security guarantees. President Trump said about the support for this and about America's readiness to take part. Russia cannot have the right to veto on Ukraine's European and NATO prospects. We hope that on the central topic Alaska there will be an immediate ceasefire. This was repeatedly said by the President of the United States. My position on Ukraine's territory has not changed. It has a foundation, the Constitution of Ukraine. As long as the Constitution of the state has not changed, the position of guaranteeing this Constitution cannot be changed. It is impossible to resolve territorial matters without Ukraine, and all of this is supported. After the Zelensky speech, Donald Trump came out. At once, we pay attention, bitely notes that he has never mentioned changing territories this time. This can be written off by the fact that he did not ask this question, but, as in the past times, no one pulled him out of the language. In general, today he was short and a little softer, but nothing good from Friday. I still do not wait, Bitely notes. Especially after the last question about whether he can convince Putin to stop striking civilized people after the negotiations. To Trump's deepest eye, he responded that no, meaning you say the goal is to stop the fire, but at the same time, you're sure that you won't even be able to convince Putin to stop striking civilized people. Attention to the question, so what's the real goal of the meeting? Bitely asks this question. The only possibly positive response for Ukraine is to convince Putin to meet with Zelensky. But I don't see how Putin can agree to this at all, Bitely notes and provides full quotes from Trump. Journalists, how was your conversation with the European leaders? And was it your decision not to invite Zelensky to a meeting with Putin? No, on the contrary, no, said Trump. We had a very good call. Zelensky was in touch. I would rate him with 10 points, very friendly. But I initially planned to meet with Putin, and then I will call the president of Zelensky and the European leaders. There's a good chance that we will have a second meeting, which will be more productive. And the first one, because during the first one I will understand where we are and what we are doing. Again, this is the Biden war. It's not my war. He dragged us into it, and it would never happen, but it turned out the way it did, and I'm here to fix it. I'm here to stop the killings of 6,000–7,000 people per week. By the way, these numbers are already a bit closer to reality than Rubio called them yesterday. Let's remember, Zelensky recently reported that the return losses of Russian armed forces are about 500 people per day. Ukraine's defense forces are up to 100 killed and missing people, most likely also killed. We'll have a second meeting, Trump continued. If the first one goes well, the second one will be very quick. I want to do this almost immediately. And the second time, I want Putin and Zelensky to meet, and me, if they want me there. Maybe the second meeting will work. The first one won't do everything. Of course, you can achieve a lot with it. It's very important, but it's a meeting that'll prepare the table for the second meeting. If it does, of course, because the second meeting might not be there. Because if I feel like it, there's no point in holding it. If I don't get the answer we need, then we won't have a second meeting. Question from journalists, will Russia have consequences if Vladimir Putin refuses to stop the war after the Friday meeting? Yes, they will. Question, what consequences will there be? Sanctions from Trump. There will be consequences. I shouldn't say which ones. There will be very serious consequences. Question, what do you think? Can you convince Putin to stop striking civilian targets? In Ukraine, Trump responds, well, I'll tell you, we already had a conversation about this. We had a lot of good conversations, and then the missile flies over the house or the apartment and people are dead on the street. I think there's no answer since we already had that conversation. I want to stop the war. It's Biden's war. I'll be very proud if I can end it, but I think there's probably no answer. Meanwhile, Trump once again took the old way. The U.S. wants to offer the RF joint development of rare gear minerals in Alaska, reports the Telegraph. Again, where did those rare gear metals come from? According to the publication, Trump intends to voice this idea of Putin at the next meeting. It is reported that as an encouragement for the end of the war in Ukraine, the White House considers the opportunity for the RF to develop resources in Alaska, as well as partially remove sanctions from the Russian airline. That is, again, Trump plans. In short, what do we know before the meeting? Let's sum it up. So the first thing, well, again, from a rational point of view, you can be 100% sure, 99%, that the meeting will happen, the author will happen. It will happen between Putin and Trump. From an emotional point of view, from the point of view of feeling, I still do not understand how Putin will arrive at the military base in Alaska. But okay, leave me in the country, like this is my... What kind of theory is this? Let's forget about it. In any case, we see that the talks about changing territories, about all these Ukrainian leaves from the Donetsk region, they somehow came to an end. Closer to the meeting, they might return because the Witkov spell has a certain time and that debuff falls off after a while. We see that Trump now has more pro-Ukrainian positions than a couple of days ago. On the one hand, this is good. On the other hand, a person who shrugs so quickly in his attitude, dependent on who he talked to, is not very good. Therefore, it is possible to suspect that Putin is fed up with him and, as it were, will still pressure Ukraine. I would not write this option down with accounts, although now, as it were, according to the statements, according to the meetings and everything else, the situation has improved. At least that's how it looks. What is taking Trump to this meeting? Trump is taking threats, Trump is taking pride. Well, that is, his standard set is twisted Prynik. The other thing is that usually this twisted Prynik is not directly twisted Prynik, but a conversation about twisted Prynik and a conversation about twisted Prynik, and this is a big difference. But in any case, Putin is going there. Putin wants to take time. Putin does not want to impose new sanctions on the US side, so let's see if Trump can push him towards something. Ideally, a ceasefire. That would be wonderful, but so far, unfortunately, it does not seem like it's close. We'll see. Meanwhile, Europeans don't plan to remove or relax sanctions. On the contrary, they help Ukraine by buying American weapons. Germany is funding a military equipment package, including ammunition for Ukraine, provided by the United States for a total of $500 million, reports Militarny. The aid will be carried out under the guise of the Peril Initiative, the Prioritized Ukraine Requirements List, a list of Ukraine's priority needs. General Secretary NATO Mark Rutte welcomed this statement by the German authorities, calling it a bright demonstration of unchanging commitment to Germany's defense of Ukraine. This shipment will help Ukraine protect itself from Russian aggression. Germany is the largest European military aid donor, and today's statement once again emphasizes its obligatory duty to help the Ukrainian people defend their freedom and sovereignty, he noted. Media Germany stated that support packages within Pural will include military goods that are either not manufactured with European industry or are more effective at being delivered to the US than by European partners or Canada. It's specifically about the critically important air defense systems needed to counter the Russian airstrikes, which are making the civilian population across Ukraine suffer even more. Let me remind you, air defense missiles, first and foremost for the Patriot air defense industry, are one of the U.S. critical supply areas, so it's not surprising that Ukraine has taken their priority. The Germany statement came after Sweden, Norway, and Denmark jointly decided at the beginning of August to allocate about $500 million to NATO's initiative for supplying American weapons to Ukraine. Earlier, Netherlands announced a similar package of funding, so the program seems to be working. We'll see how quickly these supplies reach out, but the scheme obviously works. Nevertheless, European supplies are one thing, and help directly to the military is another thing on the front line, and we continue to help out. This is now important. It is now literally saving the lives of Ukrainian soldiers fighting for their country, for their loved ones, so we continue to help them as much as we can. And we continue to raise funds for the 3rd Assault Unit. Here is the request from the fighters.
Героям слава! Ми, артилерійська розвідка 3-ї окремої штурмової бригади, звертаємося до Майкла Сіднея Накі з проханням у допомозі у Аутел Evo Max 4N 2 штуки, які нам допоможуть...
Here's the Monobank QR code in the Monobank. Subscription, private, PayPal, Bitcoin. USDT, TRC20 in general there are. Many ways to support, thank you very much to everyone who takes part in the meeting. First and foremost, thank you very much to the soldiers, it really saves their lives. Meanwhile, the Russian defense industry. Feeling problems due to sanctions. Head of the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine in the field of components of weapons, the portal war and sanction. Militia is an interactive scheme. Information about 116 enterprises manufacturing of air defense missiles, A-59M2, M2A. Almost 50 companies, 40% of which are still under the sanctions of not one country in the world. Even under such conditions, Russia is already facing serious problems with the implementation of state defense orders. The constant shortage of a foreign element base, a limited production capacity, and a break in the schedule force Russian enterprises to regularly take into account the failure to fulfill the pace and terms of production of missiles. Not even the mobilization of old systems is saving the situation. Russia is misrepresenting and adapting old versions of the R-95s as components of self-propelled heads. There are cases where R-59s, instead of active self-propelled radios, were equipped with massive mockets. GN is the most expensive element of a missile and at the same time the main problem for Russian production. Without GSM, the accuracy of the missile will be non-existent. But apparently Russia is not stopping it, because according to calculations, the missiles still hit all intended goals. Despite the fact that in Russia, dozens of enterprises produce electronic components, command systems, and other key fobs, the R-59s still remain on non-sanctive lists. Their production allows them to adapt and modernize turboreactive engines, expanding the service life of weapons killing Ukrainians daily. The above-mentioned examples prove that sanctions are actually working. Further increase in pressure and expansion of sanctions on enterprises supplying low-ranking components can even reduce the pace of production of main Russian strike tools, and it is necessary to keep working on this. Ukrainian kinetic sanctions are also working. On the night of August 14, Ukraine once again attacked the facility of the Russian energy structure in Lukoil in Volgograd. This is evidenced by geolocated video eyewitnesses from the NASA firm service and the statement of the local authorities. There is also a report of damage caused by the attack on a residential building. The Telegram channel of the Volgograd region administration quotes the statement of the governor of the region, Andriy Bakharova, who confirmed the spread and fire of oil products on the Volgograd refinery after the massive UAV attack. There are no victims, according to him. Residents of Bryansk region reported that on the night of August 13, drones again attacked the city of Unecha and the district Pereduvala Astra. It is reported that the target of the attack again became a line production depot in Unecha, in the village of Vysokaya in the Unecha region. The video from the place on which the video is seen is not confirmed. 12 enemy UAVs of the airplane type were destroyed by the forces of the air defense of the Russian Ministry of Defense over the Bryansk region. The consequences are clarified by emergency services working on the ground, the governor reported. As previously exclusively reported Astra on August 6, at least one drone hit the territory of the line production depot in Unecha. Vysokaya village in the Unecha district, the station territory has burned out. According to open data, the Unecha oil refinery is the largest link to the refinery's main line, owned by holding Uecha Transneft product. The main specialization of the refinery is transport of oil to the pipeline. The total volume of the pipeline system of Druzhba is 8,900 kilometers. The refinery line runs through several countries and crosses 45 major rivers. Oil which pumped the station in the Bryansk region was attacked by drone companies GUR, reports the sources of Unecha. The operation was carried out together with the defense forces. After a series of explosions at the station, a strong fire began. Emergency services were headed there. Cyberborishnya analyzed attacks of Ukrainian drones on the Russian RLS-48-6K-1 flight in the Saki airfield area in the occupied Crimea. Researchers found that there were only 2 attacks, on July 25-26 and on August 9-50. The last one apparently was successful, because after it the RLS left the duty area. Ukraine's Special Operations Forces reported destruction of the M-scale radial axial highway in Pokrovsk, also in Crimea, aimed at controlling the Air Force. Satellite channel Dnipro-Osen-Gorbuz confirmed the destruction of the facility. The pro-Ukrainian channel Krymsky Vetter noted that almost all Crimean airfields are part of the RLS zone and predicted problems for Russian aviation. What do you think? Which Russia territory is best covered by the air defense? Moscow and Podmoskovia, Volgograd, you didn't guess. The number of positions of air defense established around Vladimir Putin's residency in Valdai has increased to 12. Mainly we're talking complexes like the one on the tower. Radio Liberty reports about it, looking at new satellite images. At the same time, over 20 million people live in the entire Moscow region, of which about 60 positions are occupied. The news, as you understand, is good, because each such system means less for one system than for the Russian air defense or military plant in other regions. They need to cover Putin's residency even more closely so the fly doesn't fly through, even if they don't fly there. And this person will go to an American military base in Alaska? I don't know, doubtfully, but okay. Ukrainian resource Okogoro notes a continued relative lull in Russian drone strikes on Ukraine, making such an infographic according to air forces and Ukrainian armed forces. Almost 2 weeks without mass launches of UAVs like Shahed, writes the channel's author. The average number of launches during this period of the last month is 250 units. The average number of launches in August is 75. The silence is likely due to the background of Putin's and Trump's meeting this Friday, according to Okwaro, and this position looks quite reasoned, if you consider that Trump mostly brings out frames of strikes on peaceful Ukrainian cities. Nevertheless, not counting any meetings, the Russian terror of the peaceful population of Ukraine does not stop even for one day. It just became less noticeable. In the Kherson region, as a result of artillery shelling of the village of Chernobivka, a woman died and 2 more peaceful residents died in the attack of the drone, said the head of the OVO, Alexander Prokudin. In addition, Russian drones attacked civilian vehicles in the Berezovsky district of the Kherson region in the Donetsk region, as a result of which 1 person died and several were injured. In the Kherson region, UAV hit a light vehicle. After another strike, the emergency car burned down. In the Donetsk region, a light vehicle with 3 people drove into the cuvette after the drone hit, so the Russian terror continues and has not gone anywhere. Deep State notes the advance of Russian armed forces in Niknorovka on the eastern flank of the Pokrovsk direction, the foundation of the so-called Russian breakthrough of Ukrainian defense. The area of the breakthrough itself has not increased. Meanwhile, the participants of the bold Russian operation, as they say, fought for something, then fought for something. The soldiers of the 93rd Separate Mechanized Brigade, Cold Yar, captured 4 Russians in the operational zone of the 19th Army Corps in Donetsk. This was reported by the official page of the Corps on Facebook, transferred by the military. According to the data of the 19th Army Corps, the Russians took an attempt to penetrate into the deep operational zone where some were spotted and some were redeployed. 4 of the 9 occupiers were captured, 5 were destroyed in battle. During the investigation, the prisoners were reported that they belonged to the 132nd Separate Rifle Brigade, Military Unit 52892. Let me remind you, according to the Robert Lee Analytic, infiltration for Ukrainian defense was carried out exactly with the strength of the 132nd MSBR. The detainees were detained from the age of 20 to 28. This is already said to be extremely serious, collecting young and apparently relatively healthy soldiers, not 50-year-old alcoholics whose strength the Z channels recently reported. Military reports remind us that an enemy infiltration occurred in Donetsk region near the settlements of Kucherov Yar and Zolotai Cadets. On a small section of the front, Russian units advanced about 15 kilometers deep into Ukrainian defenses. From Kucherov Yar through Lesopolosa, the enemy reached Veselai village, where the forces are concentrated. In the past 24 hours, about 20 enemy infantry was spotted there. Publication Economist talked to Ukrainian defenders in this area and also confirms that the breakthrough is most likely located there. However, fighters of the Ukrainian Defense Forces are afraid that Russian operations have already achieved their political goals, not operational ones. Moment was there's no place to specify, writes The Economist. In several days before the key summit in Alaska between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin, scheduled for Friday, Russian troops broke through the Ukrainian defense line. In the area of the breakthrough in Dobrpilya, to the north of the Ukrainian fortification of Pokrovsk in the Donetsk region. Soldiers report panic and involvement. The junction of the officer of the 93rd Brigade, redeployed in this area, says that Ukraine is still clarifying where the enemy is. He estimates that the main breakthrough has advanced more than 10 kilometers, blocking the important supply road, but the sabotage groups have probably reached the other villages. The wedge has not yet expanded, but the situation is depressing, says SH Tick. There was lack of work in the construction of defense, a failure to accept the decision on site, and someone had to quickly restore the line, because there are simply no people. At the arrival of the elite units, Ukraine will probably soon hold back the pressure and again slow down Russia's offensive to a bloody and exhausting pace. But this breakthrough convinced the soldiers that Russia intends to continue the war where it can. They are afraid that the American president will make the wrong conclusion, that Ukraine is weak, and not that Russia is thirsting for blood. Ukrainian soldiers will always be against the bad world under the conditions of the enemy, says the soldier with the Khalsin Deputat, commander of the drone in the 30th Brigade. If there is a ceasefire, I want to hang a uniform and never wear it again so that I do not have to go to the military command again in 5 years. Despite the apparently success of the localization of the breakthrough, the problems of the defense forces did not share anywhere, and one of them is still the Russian planning air bomb. Among Pokrovsk and Konstantinivka, researcher Klemen Malin, analyzing the satellite image, recorded 3,200 Russian airstrikes in 3 months, including 1,400 that took place only between July 11 and August 11, according to researcher Infactum channel. 1,400 airstrikes are mostly from the north of Pokrovsk and near Shahed. So far, Klemen noted about 3,200 airstrikes on the Konstantinivka airstrip, from the railway from west to east of Toretsk to Mianored. It is an area of almost 50 kilometers, but it is the most active and dangerous. The situation is especially threatening in some areas along the front line. The city of Rodinskoye, the key to the north of Pokrovsk, was hit by about 150 attacks, mostly over the past month. In the satellite image, it shows how destroyed the city is. In the direction of Dobrpilya, it was possible to strike about 50 airstrikes on the village of Blitskaya, where Russian forces are moving forward at the moment. More interesting, it was possible to identify about 20 new airstrikes before the new Donbas defense line. It was here that Russian assault units were able to break through. More than 20 FAB strikes are visible. In the direction of Shahed Poltevka, about 1,000 strikes were inflicted over the past 3 months. If Shahed goes this way, it will open the way to the north to expand the bridgehead. Finally, in the direction of Konstantinivka, there are also many new airstrikes, especially noticeable around the lake, or rather the reservoir, where Ukrainians logistically provide their forces from the west of Toretsk. Analysis of the intensity of such a strike allows you to understand where the Russians are preparing for a major assault to break through the positions. For example, it can be seen that the Russians are planning to advance north of Pokrovsk to cut off the city near Dobrpilya and Shahed. Meanwhile, the fate of the broken Russians remains a mystery. Let me specify the main thing. Have you even noticed that 3 days have passed and no one has understood what kind of breakthrough this is? I mean that there is no information about how many Russians have failed and where they are. So it's already clear that this is not a breakthrough in classic understanding. It's a number of Russian soldiers who have crawled evil past Ukrainian positions under special details. It's not about tank columns, and the fact that some of them have already been taken prisoners and some have been destroyed means that it's unlikely that a large number of people who actually occupy the occupied territory will make it through. So the idea apparently was that, when Russian soldiers see themselves in the rear, Ukrainian fighters will run to the front, but they obviously haven't run. The Telegram channel Bakhmutski Demon describes the picture optimistically. It's quite famous and authoritative. It writes the following: Russia has threw its fools stupidly into the boiler. But for now, I'm not ready to share such an optimistic perception. This morning he wrote, "What's wrong with your clutches, Russians? They're no longer there. Where are your soldiers?" So he writes that the clutches, also known as peonies, are cut and cleared. But I'd wait for confirmation from other analysts and soldiers. However, I note that the bravado of the Z channels about what's happening slowly vanishes and fades, so it's quite possible that this is true. Deep State notes the advance of Russian armed forces in Sh Cherbanovka near Petrovka near Toretsk Karmen, which the Russians threaten to cut with strikes toward the shores of the Klebenbek Reservoir. However, it seems like it's not enough to completely cut off the supply to Ukrainian units, so the Russian forces have shifted to familiar tactics of pushing Ukrainian defense forces out of the encirclement. Let's hope politics won't move forward again, which was recently critical of Ukrainian commandment analyst Michael Kaufman. The Z-channel Vrachevaya Nia DNE widely published a text in the Z-space about the economy of the war and the war of the economy, writes Ivan Filipov, author of the channel on the Western Front, Bespermen. What is important? A clear example of the fall of fundraising into the needs of the front, which has been regularly written by many volunteer channels in recent months. Special thanks to Filipov, who takes care of this topic, and also. First, another attempt to scream at the Ministry of Defense with the proposal to invest in life rather than compensate for death. This idea has been going for 4 years, and no changes have been spotted during this time. Finally, the author notes the critical situation of Russian soldiers who are still deeply needed and are only supplied by volunteers. Today, there were so many numbers, I now want to put them into words, the Z channel writes. Not we are the only ones who have been seeing falls in recent months. That is, there are many objective reasons for it. Subscribers' financial exhaustion, vacation seasons, and many objective reasons too. Emotions are exhalating and not less. All spring we were told about the strengthening of the world and Trump is ours. And even volunteers took the chance to call the funders exposed to trust and voluntary volunteers in general. I'm not talking anymore, there are no quotes about the lawyers who provide detailed statistics about billionaire and fraud scheme on the internet, including fundraising, though the statistics are never about fundraising. All of this in combination leads to the decrease in aid to our army. Here's an example of our movement. In 2024, we raised an average of $22 million a month. In the final reports and excerpts, there are all the details and raised money for medical kits and backpacks. We raised a lot more than anyone else in the country, 214,000 medical kits and 16,000 backpacks. And the last 3 months totaled up to $16 million a month. The reasons are above. Maybe there are some more, write in the comments. 15 million is the amount that made you think and compare, because that's about the same as bypassing an army and signing a contract with one person, plus the family payout if that person is killed. For one person. And we were the only ones left, and even in the dead of June and July, we provided an average of 4,750 first aid kits, according to our statistics, about every 10th save lives, and 485 backpacks every 2 save lives. And what happens if you multiply and add the approximate numbers? 4,750,512 plus 485,2 equals 1,445. Think twice, 1,445 people will survive thanks to you. Morale of these numbers will be understood by everyone who lost their loved ones and by every patriot who doesn't care about their country. We don't say for nothing that it matters to our scale, but it directly impacts the country's demography. It's true, right, and the task before the founders of the movement is this, but I promise to post about the economy, right? Each of you can take a calculator of 1,445 people saved on average per month and multiply that by 15 million payments. Now you understand Russia's economic aid, 21.7 billion rubles a month, in the dying month. We used to do more, that's the economy of war, and the war of economy is, of course, a separate topic. It's about not losing an expensive tank because of misrepresentation of a connection or Yuri. About not losing people because of the lack of defense equipment or first aid kits. About using cheap false goals massively to spend on enemy shells. That you can't give the soldiers to the birds so they're blindly killed whole group. That's the war, the economy. Because besides the fact that women don't give birth to new Russians, another economic issue cannot be dropped off the charts. Z channels conclude their ordinary stories about the Russian army not values the lives of soldiers. In principle, we know about this, we see a lot of this with you, and I constantly repeat this, to take you away from going to the Russian army or to be deserted from it, if not yet. I continue, go away, write to the soldiers, do not get into the Russian army, especially in the background of strengthening Russia's attempts to drive you there with electronic handrails and other nonsense. In the background of constant drone attacks, the Russian security forces were covered with paranoia. In Tatarstan, after the drone attacks, the police twisted the men who launched the drones from the machine. They were Russian cadets. Several Z channels reported arrests in Tatarstan of a group that launched drones in the battlefield. Local residents noticed men in military uniforms and called the police. It turned out the drone was launched by the cadets of the military school. They were controlled by the Russian intelligence of the UAV, Orlan. Well, in principle, it is interesting the logic when such people are forced to believe, well, what they assumed. Yes, they assumed that these were Ukrainian saboteurs who launched drones. Right. You can imagine a Ukrainian saboteur who, for some reason, will do this in a military uniform. Well, that is, it is super to draw attention to yourself. A quite stupid story, but it is not bad. We told you that one of the consequences of Operation Spider will be general paranoia. Well, that is, they will stop military vehicles, they will check all goods, everything will slow down. In fact, this is what is happening. And certain Z channels and, in principle, news portals report about this quite often. That here is the traffic jam due to the truck because everyone is being tested. Here they detained a soldier who knows who. This is normal, it's part of the operation. It's part of Operation Spiderweb, part of its consequences. The fall appeal has not yet begun and various interceptions are already being used for its implementation. Employees of the OZON unit gave lists and workers were sent with a mass of possible drone attacks, after which the alarm was announced and everyone was taken out on the street. There, people were shot in the Shermenko, and those who approached in civilian clothing, the man, began reading nicknames and giving lists to the military command for the implementation of the medical mission. The lists were received from several young employees. One of them reported that this was his second such case in the past 2 months. There will be more of this now, especially in the fall, during the supply. You see, in general, it is probably necessary to talk about this topic separately. But the story is that we see very serious preparation for the call-up. We see very serious attempts to increase, in fact, the base of people who will be sent to the war. We see that electronic lists are implemented, we see that they began to work, that reinforcements come to the Russians. That is, we see some kind of quite serious intensification of the mobilization nature, the call-up nature. And the hidden mobilization, because from the call-ups about 30% of the total contractors are getting called, they are beaten, contracts are signed for them, and so on. In general, the next call-up, I think, will be quite serious. Moreover, some people believe that maybe we see some mobilization at the door. Because a lot of prohibitions are introduced, full-time prohibitions since this moment against certain social networks. There we see literally calls in WhatsApp and in Telegram were blocked over them. And in general, a lot is done to limit people from getting information, to limit people from communication between them. Does this attention deserve it? Absolutely yes. Does this mean that mobilization is not possible? But I do not take to judge here. I generally recommend everyone to go from the worst scenarios. I generally do this in life. Well, that is, I always hope for the better, but I prepare for the worst scenario. Therefore, I always have plan A, plan B, plan C, plan D, and as it were, a very large number of plans for any situation that can happen, for any unpleasant situation, attack, something else like that. In general, I have a rather such approach to this that you will not need to use the accumulated plans that exist and the training that is for them. What will you need, but you will not have them at hand? Here, so I call on you to leave the same, have plans in case of getting into the agenda register, in case of announcing mobilization, knowing the route, knowing the opportunities. If it is possible now to avoid being in the legal field of the Russian Federation, then of course you can do this, but it is clear that not everyone has the opportunity. However, evaluate the threat adequately. The threat is a very high war, a war in which Russia has very big problems. Yes, that is, no matter how much we talk about some kind of breakthrough there, about the breakthrough here, something means there did not collapse the Russian economy, the Russian army did not collapse, the Russian authorities did not collapse. Yes, but there are big problems, they accumulate, they're talking about them more and more, but there are Z channels, there are a large number of killed people. There is a continuing war without success, which did not bring any of the declared goals, including the Lugansk region, which Russia has not been able to capture yet. At the same time, there is a set of elections for Vladimir Putin, all of which are bad. The only normal one, well, how is it? He is not even good. He is normal, that is, to stop the war is at least to avoid falling into all these traps that have already started to appear. But nevertheless, there is little likely that Vladimir Putin will go by this plan. So yes, one can imagine anything work mobilization, military mobilization, more precisely, mobilization is going on in Russia, just no new sets were held, and in order to announce a new set, it is not necessary to take any additional laws, because in Russia the mobilization order that was, in fact, introduced by Vladimir Putin in 2022 continues to work. Have this in mind, treat this seriously, and know what you will do in certain situations. Other confirmation that the so-called veteran of the SVO is not needed by anyone. Hakarukov Alexander Sergeyevich, who served in the 7th Separate Guard Corps Brigade, Military Unit 400-321, again wrote a request to the President of the Russian Federation and the Minister of Defense with a request for help. I ask for help to disassemble. How long will it take me to see the request for help? How long will it take me to go through these military commissaries, through everyone to ask for help? Who will I ask for help from? I fought with conscience, I came home with my children. Please, Vladimir Vladimirovich, pay attention to this video. Sorry again. The soldier said that after the injuries, he was discharged from military service. He was admitted to the category of V quality. After that, he applied to the military command to get a military report and pay for the wound, but the men refused. What is a military command? They form documents. For what Filsov told me so that my documents do not form, here is the justice. Returning to Putin, Vladimir Vladimirov said in the 5th video that he saw a request to please take back this situation. Alexander says that during the military service he was awarded a medal, but has not yet received it. When the soldier applied to the military command for the lack of a payout, he was told that since there is no medal, there will be no payout. Also, the man applied to the local deputy with a request to form a ground unit, but received a refusal, since his wife already has a unit. The soldier said that he had repeatedly applied to the President of the Russian Federation and the Minister of Defense with a request to sort out the situation, but no results were achieved. He recorded his first video in January 2025. We meet our demands, we ask, we humiliate ourselves. I ask to sort out Vladimir Vladimirovich's investigation. Well, the news from the rubric you will not come up with the residents of the village of Dubrovnaya of the Volsky district of the Saratov region. They turned to Vladimir Putin, writing down the rap in which he asks to put gas in their houses. In addition, they require from the authorities to repair the road and fix the connection. In the village of Dubrovnaya, people of our people have been waiting for gas for 30 years, to whom we have only not gone. We have built all the doors they have promised for many years, but there is no point in it. President, listen to us, give your strict order. Gas, we need gas. President, listen to us. The military authorities are refusing. All hope is on you. Gas, we need gas. President, listen to us. The military authorities are refusing. All hope is on you. According to the village people, they have been achieving gasification for 30 years, but they still heat houses with firewood. They claim that at the beginning of the 90s, when the neighboring village provided gas, Dubrovnaya wasn't included in the project due to a mistake in the name. The village was renamed Dubrovnaya, and it allegedly failed in the program. Residents also complained about bad transportability and the lack of online communication, making old people unable to call emergency services. However, the lack of online communication is now a more widespread problem. In the video, the chorus says, gas, we need gas. President, can you hear us? The military authorities reject it. All hope is on you. The administration of the military district rejects the problem of gasification due to the redevelopment of the village. According to them, Dubrovnaya is written only on the road sign due to a mistake of the company's contractor. In the official documents, the name has always been the same. Officials explained that in the decades of the 14th year, gas was provided to the neighboring Kulikovka as part of the municipal program, but Dubrovnaya was not included, since about 30 people were living there then. The cost of construction of the gas pipeline by 11 kilometers was too high. At the moment, 51 people are registered in the village and live up to 100 in the summer. According to the administration, after many calls of the residents, Dubrovnik was turned on in the plan of gasification on the 28th and 29th years. The authorities recognized the lack of funds for the repair of the road between Talakina and Kulikov, demanding a replacement of 28 kilometers of canvas, and promised to turn to the government of the Saratov region. Officials did not comment on the complaint of the problem with the connection. This is not the first call of the residents of Dubrovnik to the authorities. On the previous message, they did not receive an answer. In fact, you know well where all this money could be found, not destroying Ukraine, on which a huge part of the Russian budget is now going. Mordovia, former mercenary of the CHVK Wagner, and 6 judges were left free for 2 thefts of cars. The Druzhba District Court condemned the 32-year-old former mercenary of the CHVK Wagner, Nikolai Dumkin, to 1 year and 10 months of decision of freedom conditional for the theft of a car, reports the press service of the court. According to the investigation in June 2025, Dumkin, being in the state of alcoholism, found an unclosed car Vaz with a key to the fire in the Bordechka. He drove the car and headed toward the village of Salezhgar, but on the way, he drove to the block where the police were detained. This is not the first similar case with his participation. In 2024, he was judged for the theft of a Lada Priora by a taxi driver. Then he was also more drunk. He sat in the unclosed car with the keys to the fire, which were his friends. On the way, they tried to stop the police car, with which Dumkin eventually ran into. In court, he stated that he did not plan to take transport. He wanted to just drive. Then he was fined a fine of 40,000 rubles. In both cases, Dumkin took part in combat actions in Ukraine, as well as his awards, including a medal for courage and signs of distinction from the CHVK Wagner. Until 1922, he was judged as a minimum of 5 times, mostly on charges of theft, but remained free. In 1917, Dumkin was sent to the colony of the General Regiment for 4 years and 10 months. So, as you can see, the drunk military represents a threat to everyone around, because not just a theft, but a theft of a machine in a drunk state leads to human tragedy. It has not yet ended here, but given that it remains free, unfortunately, it is only a matter of time. Michael Nacke was with you, and see you soon. All the best, bye.